Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The recording lasted 47 seconds. Jennifer Nakamura had listened to it 6 times in the ranger station parking lot, her hand shaking so badly the phone nearly slipped from her grip each time Megan Price's voice dissolved into that wet, choking sound that wasn't screaming. Wasn't anything human vocal cords could produce. Dispatch had sent it as an attachment with a single-line email. Found on backup server. Timestamped 0347 this morning. Thought you should hear before heading out. The last 19 seconds were the worst. Megan still breathing, but something else breathing with her. Through her. A doubled rhythm like 2 hearts beating in one chest. Jennifer sat in her Jeep with the engine running, heat blasting against the October chill seeping through the windows. Rain hammered the windshield in sheets, typical for the Hoh rainforest even in early fall. The digital clock read 0647. Her daughter Kayla would be waking up soon, 300 miles away in Tacoma, expecting her usual morning call. Jennifer's mother would make breakfast, walk her to the bus stop, help with homework. The same routine they'd maintained for the past 8 months since Jennifer took this posting at Olympic National Park. Good pay, federal benefits, a chance to dig out from under the mortgage payments she'd been drowning in since the divorce. She pressed play again. 7th time, Megan's voice strained but controlled. Jennifer, if you get this, something's wrong with the Faulkner Creek Junction. The trail markers, they're all... Static burst across the recording, but underneath it, something else. A whisper in a language Jennifer didn't recognize, syllables that slid together like water over stones. Then Megan again, but different now, her words overlapping with themselves. Don't come, don't come, don't come, please come, please. The wet sound, the doubled breathing, silence. Jennifer had worked with Megan Price for 7 months. Competent, thorough, maybe a bit too eager to take solo assignments in the backcountry. 26 years old, recent graduate from University of Washington's forestry program, engaged to a software engineer in Seattle. She'd been assigned to investigate reports of trail damage along the upper Hoh River Trail, specifically around Faulkner Creek where a small footbridge had supposedly collapsed. Routine assessment, maybe 2 days maximum in the field. She'd left the Salt Duke Ranger Station 3 days ago. The email from dispatch included coordinates: 478934DN, 123.8467 DW, 12 miles into the rainforest, past the maintained trail system, into old growth that predated European contact by centuries. Sitka spruce rising 300 feet into permanent mist, western hemlock dense enough to turn noon into twilight. Jennifer had hiked that area twice, both times feeling something fundamentally wrong about the silence there. No birdsong, no squirrel chatter, just the constant drip of moisture and the groan of ancient wood. She checked her pack one final time. Garmin Oregon 450 GPS with fresh batteries, Motorola XPR 7550 radio, Benchmade bushcrafter knife, wilderness first aid kit, water purification tablets, emergency shelter, 3 days of food she probably wouldn't need. Her personal phone went into a waterproof case, though coverage would die within 2 miles. The GPS had the coordinates pre-programmed. 12 miles in, however many hours of daylight she could squeeze from the October sky, and the growing certainty that she wouldn't like what she found. Jennifer locked the Jeep and shouldered her pack, 52 pounds of gear that felt heavier than it should. The trailhead marker for the Hoh River Trail looked freshly painted, cheerful yellow letters promising a moderate difficulty hike through pristine temperate rainforest. The National Park Service didn't mention that the forest swallowed hikers sometimes, that search and rescue operations occasionally ended with empty sleeping bags and equipment scattered in patterns that suggested the occupant had simply stood up and walked away mid-sleep. The trail started wide and well-maintained, wooden boardwalks over the wettest sections, informational placards describing the ecosystem in enthusiastic detail. Jennifer passed the Hall of Mosses Junction without pausing. Tourists loved that loop. The Sitka spruce dripping with club moss like frozen green waterfalls. Everything soft and ethereal and completely safe within sight of the parking lot. She'd taken Kayla there last spring during a visit, her daughter's small hand warm in hers as they walked under trees that had been ancient when the Mayflower landed. 3 miles in, the boardwalks ended. The trail narrowed to packed earth, then to something more suggestion than path. Root systems and fallen logs creating natural obstacles. The rainforest closed in with almost aggressive intimacy, branches touching overhead. Light filtered through so many layers of canopy that the world took on a greenish underwater quality. Water dripped constantly, a million separate sounds merging into white noise that could hide anything. Jennifer's radio crackled at mile marker 5. Ranger Nakamura, this is Sol Duke Base, radio check. She keyed the transmit button. Sol Duke, this is Nakamura, signal clear, approximately 5 miles in, maintaining course to coordinates. Copy that. Weather Service is calling for heavy rain this afternoon. You've got maybe 4 hours before the creek crossings become impassable. 4 hours to hike 12 miles through increasingly difficult terrain, locate Megan and hike back out. Jennifer did the math and felt her stomach clench. Understood. We'll advise if situation changes. Be careful out there, Jennifer. We've been getting weird reports from that sector. Define weird. Static filled the pause. When the dispatcher's voice returned, it carried an uncertainty that Jennifer had never heard from the usually unflappable Rebecca Santos. Hikers reporting voices in languages nobody recognizes, seeing figures that disappear when they look directly at them. One guy swears he saw the same woman 3 times in one day, miles apart, wearing what he described as a white burial shroud. Park psychiatrist thinks it's mass hysteria from some online urban legend. What do you think? I think Megan's been out of contact for 68 hours, and that recording sounds like someone having a psychotic break. I think you should have backup. No time to wait for a team. I'll stay in radio contact as long as I can. Your call. Sol Duke out. The trail climbed along a ridgeline, the Hoh River visible through gaps in the trees. A dark ribbon of glacial melt, perpetually gray with suspended sediment. Jennifer's GPS showed 7 miles completed, coordinates getting closer. Her boots had stopped being waterproof somewhere around mile 3, each step producing a squelch that seemed obscenely loud in the muffled quiet. At mile 8, she found the first marker. Not a trail marker, a piece of surveyor's tape, bright pink tied around a western hemlock trunk at exactly eye level. Jennifer stopped studying it. The knot was recent, the tape unstained by the constant moisture. Megan's pack would have carried surveyor's tape for marking damaged trail sections. 30 feet further, another pink marker, then another. They led off the main trail, descending into a section of forest so dense with ferns that the ground disappeared under layers of vegetation. Jennifer hesitated, checking her GPS. The coordinates lay 3 miles northeast, not in this direction. But Megan had left these markers for a reason. The decision took approximately 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than it should have. Every moment away from the planned route was a moment not getting closer to extraction. But Megan had marked this path deliberately, and Jennifer had already committed to finding her. She followed the pink tape into the ferns. The forest changed within 50 yards. The trees grew differently here. Their trunks curved in ways that suggested some fundamental wrongness in their growth patterns. Branches reaching down instead of up. Root systems exposed above ground in configurations that looked almost deliberate. The dripping stopped. Not gradually, it simply ceased between one step and the next, as if Jennifer had crossed some invisible threshold where the laws governing precipitation no longer applied. Her inner ear insisted she was descending, but the GPS showed her elevation holding steady. The contradiction created a vertigo that made each step uncertain. She focused on the pink markers, following them through increasingly surreal landscape. A fallen log hollow enough to walk through, its interior carved with what looked like kanji characters, deep gouges in wood that should have rotted away decades ago. A clearing where every tree grew in a perfect circle, their canopies intertwined so completely they formed a solid roof. The ground underneath carpeted in moss soft enough to look comfortable. The 14th marker hung from a branch above a creek that shouldn't exist according to her topographic map. The water ran perfectly clear, which was wrong. Every waterway in the Ho watershed carried glacial silt. This creek looked like liquid glass, so transparent that Jennifer could see individual pebbles 15 feet down, could count the rings in the stone. On the opposite bank, a structure. Not natural, definitely not Park Service construction. Someone had built a small shrine using weathered cedar, gray with age. The joinery so precise it required no nails or modern fasteners. The roof peaked in a style Jennifer recognized from pictures her grandmother had shown her. A miniature torii gate, Shinto architecture completely incongruous in the Olympic wilderness. In front of the shrine sat a bundle wrapped in white cloth, compact and rectangular, bound with cord that might have been red once but had faded to brown. Jennifer's radio chose that moment to emit a burst of static so violent she flinched. When she keyed the transmit button, nothing happened. The display showed full battery, good signal strength, but the channel remained dead. She tried her phone. No coverage, which was expected, but the screen itself looked wrong. The time displayed as 3:47 a.m., which was impossible. She'd been hiking for hours. She crossed the creek by stepping on stones that felt warmer than they should, their surface unnaturally dry despite the omnipresent moisture. Up close, the shrine showed signs of recent maintenance. Someone had swept the small platform clean, had placed offerings. A bottle of sake, now empty. A bowl of rice, now moldy. And a photograph in a plastic sleeve, protected from the elements. The photograph showed a young woman, Asian features, early 20s, wearing a white dress that might have been a wedding gown or might have been something else. She stood in front of what looked like this exact shrine, her expression impossible to read, not smiling, not frowning, utterly blank. Written on the back in permanent marker, Keiko Yamada, 1987, 24 years ago. Jennifer felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the October temperature. The bundle wrapped in white cloth sat precisely centered on the shrine's platform. Some instinct older than thought screamed at Jennifer not to touch it, but her training overrode instinct. She photographed it from multiple angles with her phone, documenting position and condition, then carefully unwrapped the cord. Inside, a journal, its pages swollen with moisture but still legible, and a small wooden box containing strands of black hair, impossibly long, tied with thread that looked like it had been woven from more hair. Jennifer opened the journal to the last entry, dated September 15th, 2011, 3 weeks ago. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. Found the shrine today. The locals in Forks warned me not to hike this section, said there's bad history here. A Japanese woman named Keiko Yamada came to Olympic in 1987, some kind of exchange student program with the Forestry Service. She fell in love with an American ranger, got pregnant, and he abandoned her. She walked into the Ho rainforest and was never seen again. They found her effects at a campsite, but no body. The Quinault tribe has stories about this area, calls it a thin place where the world of the living touches something else. The shrine is hers. Someone maintains it, leaves offerings. I've seen a woman in white 3 times now, always at a distance, always watching. She matches the description from Keiko's photograph. This should scare me more than it does. Instead, I feel drawn to her, like she's trying to tell me something, like she needs help. I'm going to stay another night, see if she appears again. I think she's lonely. The handwriting changed in the final paragraph, becoming erratic, letters bleeding into each other. She's not lonely, she's hungry. I can feel her in my head. She wants. Jennifer closed the journal, her hands suddenly numb. The photograph of Keiko Yamada stared up at her from the shrine, that blank expression now looking less blank and more expectant, like someone waiting for a door to open. A branch snapped behind her. Jennifer spun, hand instinctively dropping to the canister of bear spray on her hip. 30 feet away, partially obscured by a massive Sitka spruce, stood Megan Price. Relief flooded through Jennifer with such intensity that her knees actually weakened. Megan! Jesus Christ, we've been looking everywhere. Are you hurt? We got your transmission. Dispatch sent. She stopped. Something about Megan's posture was wrong. She stood perfectly still, arms hanging loose at her sides, head tilted at an angle that suggested every vertebra in her neck had been removed and replaced with something more flexible. Her ranger uniform was soaked through, but not with rain. The fabric looked stained with creek water, with the kind of saturation that came from full submersion. "Megan?" Jennifer took a step forward. "Can you hear me?" Megan's head rotated further, impossible degrees, until she faced Jennifer despite her body still oriented in the original direction. When she spoke, her voice carried that same doubled quality from the recording. Two people speaking in imperfect synchronization. "Jennifer Nakamura, you came. We knew you knew we would." The temperature dropped 20 degrees in the space between heartbeats. Jennifer's breath emerged as visible vapor. Ice formed on the shrine behind her, crackling as it spread across the wood. "What's happening to you?" Jennifer forced her voice to stay level, professional. "Megan, you need medical attention. We need to get you back to the ranger station." Megan went into the creek. The doubled voice spoke with terrible patience, like explaining something to a child. Megan tried to help, wanted to release us, broke the binding cords, but we needed her more, needed her voice, her body, her warm warmth. Megan's body took a step forward, joints bending in sequences that didn't match human anatomy. Another step. Her face remained completely expressionless, but her eyes, Jennifer finally looked directly at her eyes and felt her gorge rise. They were filmed over with something that looked like cataract but moved, swirling patterns of gray and white that suggested depth, suggested something looking out from very far away. "We were abandoned here." The voice came from Megan's mouth but originated somewhere deeper, somewhere that made Jennifer's teeth ache. "Left alone in the forest, pregnant with child that would never be born. Walked until the creek took us, held stones until the water filled lungs, until the cold made everything stop. But stopping was not ending. The forest kept us. The thin place trapped us. 24 years waiting for someone to hear us." Jennifer's hand closed around her radio, uselessly dead. Her phone showed 3:47 a.m., frozen. The GPS screen had developed a crack she didn't remember, the coordinates replaced by symbols that might have been kanji or might have been something older. Megan heard us. Another step closer. Megan felt sorry for us, wanted to help release us from the shrine. Foolish kind girl. But her warmth felt good, her living body such relief from cold. "We wear her now. We might keep her, unless..." The doubled voice paused, Megan's head tilted impossibly far, studying Jennifer with those filmed-over eyes. "Unless you offer exchange. You have child, yes? We smell her on you, the love scent, the protection need. You would do anything for daughter. We understand. We died with daughter still inside, never born, never held. You could bring us your child. Let us hold warmth again. Then we release this one." Jennifer felt something fundamental shift in her chest, a protective rage so intense it bordered on physical pain. "You're not touching my daughter. Then we keep this one." Megan's body swayed, boneless. "Keep her until she rots around us, until we wear her bones. Then we wait for the next hiker, the next warm body. The forest gives us many chances." The thing wearing Megan smiled, and the expression was so wrong on her young face that Jennifer's vision actually grayed at the edges. Behind Megan, barely visible through the trees, other figures appeared. Women in white, their clothing old-fashioned, their faces blank. Not ghosts, too solid for that, too present. They moved with the same jointless fluidity as Megan, circling closer. Jennifer's training had covered bear attacks, hypothermia, broken bones, cardiac events. Nothing in the Park Service manual addressed demonic possession by the vengeful ghost of a woman dead for 24 years. Her hand moved to the Benchmade knife, which felt ludicrous. What would she do, stab a spirit? But the journal had mentioned binding cords. The shrine contained something that mattered. And Megan was still in there somewhere, still breathing, even if something else breathed with her. "What do you really want?" Jennifer asked. buying time she didn't have. Not my daughter. You said you wanted release. The smile faded from Megan's face. We want him. The ranger who promised love, promised future, then left us alone when Belly grew large. Robert Fitzgerald. He lives still, in town called Forks, fat and old and happy with wife and children who grew to adulthood. We want him to know what Cold Creek feels like. Want him to hold stones until lungs fill. Want him to understand what alone forever means. Robert Fitzgerald. Jennifer knew the name. Retired ranger, had to be in his 60s now. Ran a guide service out of Forks, pillar of the community, coached Little League, donated to the library fund. She'd met him once at a regional meeting, remembered kind eyes and easy laugh. The thing in Megan's body moved closer still, near enough that Jennifer could smell the creek water, could see the moss beginning to grow in Megan's hair. Bring us Fitzgerald. We step out of this warm girl, step into him instead. Justice for abandonment, justice for dying alone. Then we rest. And if I refuse, then we feast. One by one we take hikers, take rangers, take everyone who enters our forest until the thin place spreads, until Olympic itself becomes our shrine. We have patience. We have nothing but time. The women in white had completed their circle. 8 of them. No, 10. More appearing every moment. Jennifer wasn't looking directly at them. All with that same blank expression. All wearing variations of wedding dresses or burial shrouds. The fabric distinction unclear. All dead. All waiting. Jennifer's mind raced through options, discarding each immediately. She couldn't fight spirits. Couldn't outrun something that existed partially outside physical space. Couldn't negotiate when the entity held every advantage. The only leverage she had was knowledge. She knew what Keiko wanted, understood the source of her rage. And she had a daughter waiting 300 miles away who needed her mother to come home. I need time, Jennifer said. I need to find Fitzgerald, convince him to come here 24 hours. The thing wearing Megan cocked its head, considering. 12 hours. When darkness comes, if you haven't returned, we push deeper into this warm body. We find the places where her self hides, we consume them. By dawn she will be only meat, and we will wear her to the ranger station. We'll smile with her mouth, we'll touch others with her hands. We'll spread. 12 hours. I'll bring him. We will know if you lie. Megan's filmed over eyes fixed on Jennifer with terrible intensity. We taste truth in living blood. You believe you can convince the old man. You believe he might come. Barely believe thread-thin hope, but enough. If hope breaks, we will know. We'll take this girl immediately. Jennifer nodded once sharply, then turned and ran. The forest had changed again. The trees seemed to lean toward her as she crashed through undergrowth, their branches reaching with almost animate hunger. The pink surveyor's tape was gone. She retraced her path by instinct and desperation. GPS worthless, radio dead, phone showing 3:47 a.m. in permanent loop. Twice she heard footsteps behind her, that boneless, fluid gait. But when she looked back, nothing was there except the women in white, standing motionless between the trees, watching. She reached the main trail gasping, her lungs burning. The transition was abrupt. One moment in the twisted nightmare forest, the next on maintained Park Service trail with afternoon light slanting through normal trees at normal angles. Her phone's clock suddenly lurched forward, correcting itself. 2:17 p.m. The radio crackled to life mid-transmission. Kimura, respond. You've been dark for 3 hours. Respond. Sol Duke, this is Nakamura. Jennifer's voice came out ragged. I'm on trail heading back to base. I found Megan. Situation is complicated. I need you to locate Robert Fitzgerald in Forks and get him to the ranger station immediately. Say again? You found her? Is she injured? Get Fitzgerald. Tell him... Jennifer paused, calculating what would work. Tell him someone from his past needs to speak with him. Tell him it's about Keiko Yamada. He'll know the name. The pause that followed stretched long enough that Jennifer wondered if the signal had dropped. Then, copy. I'll make the call. ETA to station? Jennifer checked her GPS. 12 miles, but downhill now, adrenaline driving her muscles. 4 hours maximum. Roger. Be advised, weather's deteriorating. Heavy rain moving in. As if on cue, the first drops hit Jennifer's face. Within minutes, it became a deluge, the trail transforming into a creek, water flowing ankle-deep over roots and stones. She pushed through it, half running, half stumbling. The image of Megan's filmed-over eyes burned into her retinas. The hike back took 3 hours and 47 minutes. Jennifer emerged at the trailhead as full darkness settled, her headlamp carving a cone of light through rain so heavy it looked solid. The ranger station glowed like a sanctuary, windows bright. Rebecca's car in the lot alongside an unfamiliar pickup truck. Inside, warmth hit her like a physical force. Rebecca stood up from the desk, concern evident. Jesus, Jennifer, you look like death. Sit down before you fall down. Fitzgerald? Jennifer managed. In the conference room. Wasn't happy about being summoned, but when I mentioned Keiko Yamada, his whole attitude changed. Who is she? Someone he killed. Jennifer stripped off her soaked jacket, her hands shaking with cold and adrenaline crash. Not directly, but he killed her anyway. The man waiting in the conference room had aged well. Silver hair neatly trimmed, weathered face suggesting decades outdoors, sturdy build going soft around the middle. He stood when Jennifer entered, extending a hand she didn't take. Robert Fitzgerald. Rebecca said this was urgent, mentioned a name I haven't heard in years. Keiko Yamada. How do you know about her? Jennifer sat down hard in the nearest chair. She's in the Hoh rainforest. She's been there since 1987, and she wants to see you. Fitzgerald's expression went carefully neutral. I don't understand. Keiko disappeared in 1987. They searched for weeks, found her campsite abandoned but no body. The assumption was she got lost, succumbed to exposure. It was tragic. She drowned herself in a creek. She was pregnant with your child. You abandoned her. The color drained from Fitzgerald's face so quickly that for a moment Jennifer thought he might faint. He sat down heavily. How could you possibly? I never told anyone about. He stopped, mouth working soundlessly. She's showing me, Jennifer said flatly. She's possessing another ranger right now, a 26-year-old woman named Megan Price. She says if you don't come face her, if you don't accept responsibility, she'll take Megan permanently. We'll start taking others. She's been waiting 24 years for this. That's insane. Possession? You expect me to believe? Jennifer pulled out her phone, found the photo of the shrine, showed him the picture of Keiko Yamada. Fitzgerald's hand trembled as he took the phone, staring at the image. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, she was so young. I was married. My wife was pregnant with our second child. When Keiko told me she was pregnant too, I panicked. Told her it was a mistake, that it couldn't continue. I offered to help her get home to Japan, gave her money. I thought she left. I didn't know. If I'd known she was going to. But you didn't check, didn't follow up. Just let her disappear and told yourself it wasn't your problem. Fitzgerald's face crumpled. I was 28 years old and terrified, and I made a choice that's haunted me every day since. When they found her campsite empty, I knew. In my gut, I knew she'd killed herself because of me. But I couldn't say anything without destroying my marriage, my career. So I stayed silent. Let them think it was an accident. She wants justice, Jennifer said. She wants you to understand what she experienced. The fear, the abandonment, the cold. She wants you in that creek with her, and if I refuse, then Megan Price dies slowly, possessed by something that will wear her body until it rots. Then other hikers, other rangers. The thing that used to be Keiko doesn't just want revenge anymore. She wants to spread her pain until the entire park becomes her grave. Fitzgerald sat silent for a long moment, his breathing ragged. Finally, what happens if I go to her, if I face this? I don't know. Maybe she takes you instead of Megan. Maybe having you acknowledge what you did releases her. Maybe we both die and she gets stronger. I have no fucking idea how any of this works. But you're asking me to go anyway. Jennifer thought of her daughter, 8 years old, waiting in Tacoma for a mother who might not come home. thought of Megan Price, barely older than a kid herself, dying by degrees while something ancient and furious hollowed her out from inside. Thought of every hiker who would follow them into the Hoh rainforest unknowing and innocent. "Yes," she said, "I'm asking you to go." Fitzgerald closed his eyes. 30 seconds passed. When he opened them again, something had changed in his expression. Acceptance, maybe. Or the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying a secret for 24 years. "All right," he said. "I'll go." They left the ranger station at 9:47 p.m., against every protocol, in terrain that had intensified to the point where the headlamps barely penetrated 5 feet. Rebecca had tried to argue, wanted to call in a full SAR team, wait for daylight. Jennifer overruled her. The 12-hour deadline was 8 hours gone. They had maybe 4 hours before Keiko's patience ran out. Fitzgerald followed her into the darkness without complaint, moving with the easy competence of someone who'd spent his life in wilderness. They didn't speak. The rain and exertion made conversation impossible anyway, breath needed for the brutal pace Jennifer set. 4 hours to hike 12 miles in conditions that would make experienced climbers hesitate. Jennifer's legs burned, her wet boots raising blisters that burst and bled, and kept walking. Behind her, Fitzgerald kept up with grim determination. The man had to be 65, but whatever guilt drove him provided fuel enough. At the 2-hour mark, Jennifer's headlamp found the pink surveyor's tape. It had returned, the markers glowing in the LED light like runway lights guiding them in. She left the main trail without pausing, Fitzgerald following. The forest transition happened faster this time, reality peeling away like wet paper. One moment hiking through normal rain-soaked Olympic wilderness, the next in that twisted otherworld where the trees grew wrong and the dripping stopped and something vast and cold watched from the spaces between heartbeats. The shrine appeared ahead, its miniature torii gate perfectly dry despite the storm that raged everywhere else. The women in white stood in a semicircle around it, 10 of them, 12, 15, all perfectly still, all watching with eyes that filmed over with swirling gray and white. In the center, Megan Price knelt before the shrine, hands folded in her lap, posture rigid. The thing inside her turned Megan's head as Jennifer and Fitzgerald approached, and that doubled voice spoke with terrible satisfaction. "You brought him. The old man who ran. We smell guilt on him like rotting flowers." "Good. Good." Fitzgerald stepped forward and Jennifer saw him truly see what had become of Megan. The filmed eyes, the moss growing in her hair, the way her joints bent wrong. He made a sound low in his throat, choked and horrified. "Keiko," he said, "if you're in there, if any part of you remains, I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry for what I did to you, for abandoning you, for being a coward. I've lived with that guilt every day, but I know that means nothing compared to what you suffered. If you need someone to punish, punish me. Let this girl go. She's innocent. Please." The thing in Megan's body stood with that boneless fluidity, moving close enough to Fitzgerald that he flinched. When it spoke, Keiko's voice emerged more clearly from beneath Megan's, a third layer adding to the chorus. "Sorry. Such small word for such large harm. You were sorry then too, when you gave money and told me to go away. Sorry did not warm me when I walked into creek. Sorry did not fill my lungs with air when I chose water instead. Sorry did not birth the child I carried, did not give her name, did not let her live." "I know," Fitzgerald whispered. "I know, and there's nothing I can do to fix it. But please, don't punish this girl for my sins. If you want justice, take it from me." The women in white moved closer, forming a tighter circle. Jennifer's hand dropped to the useless radio on her hip, then to the Benchmade knife, knowing it would do nothing against spirits, but needing something solid to hold. The thing wearing Megan reached out and touched Fitzgerald's face with hands that looked human, but moved like water. Fingers too flexible, too cold. Fitzgerald held still, though tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "We could take you," the voices said. "Push into your old man body, wear your flesh until it fails. But you are not warm enough, not young enough, not enough punishment for the years you stole. We want—" The voices paused and something shifted in Megan's filmed eyes. A flicker, a brief clearing of the white swirls. want to rest. Megan's own voice, weak but present. Jennifer, she's so tired, so lonely. She doesn't want more bodies. She wants to stop being cold. Quiet. The other voices drowned out Megan immediately. We do not tire. We do not forgive. We consume. But Jennifer had heard it. The crack in Keiko's certainty, the exhaustion underneath the rage. 24 years of fury was still 24 years of isolation, of existing in the thin place between life and death with no release. Keiko, Jennifer said carefully, what happened to you was evil, unforgivable. But becoming what you've become, possessing innocent people, threatening to spread your pain, that's not justice. That's just more evil, more loneliness. Is this really what you want? Another 24 years of cold, of watching hikers from between the trees, of waiting? The women in white began to flicker, their forms becoming less solid. Keiko's voices spoke from Megan's mouth, but with less certainty now. What else remains? We cannot live. We cannot leave. The forest keeps us in the thin place, in the cold, forever. Let me help you leave, Jennifer said. Tell me what you need. Real release, not possession, not spreading the curse. Tell me how to end this properly. The silence stretched. Rain continued to hammer the forest beyond their protected bubble. Fitzgerald stood frozen, hardly breathing. The women in white wavered like flames in wind. Finally, Keiko's voice emerged alone, without the doubled chorus. The shrine binds us, the offerings, the hair, the photograph. They anchor us to this world because we could not let go, could not release the hate. Burn them, burn the shrine. Free us from the tether. And you'll release Megan? If the shrine burns, we burn with it. The thin place will close. We will go wherever the dead go when they stop clinging to the living world. Fitzgerald stepped forward, his voice rough. Before you go, I need you to know. I named my daughter Keiko. My second daughter, born 3 months after you disappeared. My wife never knew why I insisted on that name. She's 37 now, has 2 children of her own. Every time I see her, every time I say her name, I remember you. I remember what I did. It's not enough, I know it's not, but I need you to know that you weren't forgotten, that I've carried you all these years. The thing in Megan's body went very still. When Keiko's voice spoke again, it sounded smaller, more human. You named her Keiko. Yes. The daughter I abandoned before she was born. I gave her name to the daughter I raised. I tried to honor you the only way I could without destroying my family. It was selfish and insufficient, but it was all I had. The women in white began to fade, their forms becoming transparent. Jennifer could see through them now to the twisted trees beyond. Megan's body swayed, and when she spoke again, it was only her voice cracking with strain. She's letting go. She says, burn it. Burn it now before she changes her mind, before the cold makes her forget how tired she is. Jennifer didn't hesitate. She pulled the emergency lighter from her pack, approached the shrine. The wood was ancient and dry despite the moisture everywhere else. The photograph of Keiko Yamada watched her with that blank expression as Jennifer touched flame to the cedar. It caught immediately, fire spreading with impossible speed, consuming the shrine in seconds. The white cloth bundle with its burden of hair writhed in the flames as if alive. The photograph curled, blackened, Keiko's face distorting in the heat until it became something else entirely. A smile, maybe, or a scream, or both. Megan collapsed. Jennifer lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. The young woman's eyes had cleared, the filmed-over swirls vanishing like they'd never existed. She was breathing normally now, a single rhythm, her own. Jennifer? Megan's voice was hoarse but entirely her own. What? How long was I? You're safe now. You're back. The women in white were gone. The shrine burned to ash in seconds, the flames dying as quickly as they'd risen. The forest around them shuddered once, like something massive taking a final breath, then went still, normal still. The rain found them again, cold and real and entirely natural. Jennifer's radio crackled to life. Nakamura, this is Sol Duke Base. Do you copy? Your emergency beacon just activated. Emergency beacon. Jennifer hadn't triggered it, but as the thin place closed, as Keiko's presence finally released its grip on this section of forest, perhaps reality had noticed their distress and reached back. Sol Duke, I copy. 3 souls. Mobile. Requesting extraction at... She checked her GPS, which suddenly showed correct coordinates again. Faulkner Creek Junction. 1 injured party. Needs medical evaluation. Copy that. SAR team is already en route to your beacon. ETA 40 minutes. Jennifer looked at Fitzgerald, who stood staring at the ashes of the shrine with an expression she couldn't read. Then at Megan, who was crying softly, shaking with cold and shock and relief. It's over, Jennifer said, as much to herself as to them. It's really over. But even as she said it, even as the forest settled back into its normal patterns of dripping moisture and distant bird calls, even as the women in white faded into memory, Jennifer knew that wasn't entirely true. The thin place had closed. Keiko Yamada had found her rest. But Jennifer had seen what existed in those spaces between life and death, had felt the cold that persisted beyond the grave, had learned that some wrongs created ghosts that could possess the living. She would go home to Kayla in 3 days after the paperwork and the medical evaluations and the debriefings, where she would tell a carefully edited version that omitted possession and spirits and shrines that burned with supernatural fire. She would hold her daughter and smell her shampoo and be grateful for warmth and life and the simple fact of a heartbeat. But she would also remember, would know that the Olympic rainforest held thin places still, that rage and abandonment could birth something that persisted beyond death, that the line between the living world and whatever lay beyond was thinner than anyone wanted to believe. The SAR team found them 47 minutes later, LED headlamps cutting through the rain like small suns. They wrapped Megan in thermal blankets, checked her vitals, radioed ahead to Olympic Medical Center. Fitzgerald went with them quietly, an old man who looked older still, carrying a confession he would never voice but would never forget. Jennifer hiked out last, moving slowly through the forest that had become ordinary again. Her phone showed the correct time, 2:34 a.m. She had 1 bar of signal. She called her mother. Jennifer, do you know what time it is? I know, Mom, sorry. Is Kayla asleep? Of course she is. Are you all right? You sound strange. I'm fine. I'm coming home in a few days. Tell Kayla I love her. Tell her I'll be there for her 6th grade graduation, for every birthday, for everything. I'm not going anywhere. Jennifer, what happened out there? Just a hard rescue. Made me remember what's important. Go back to sleep, Mom. I'll call tomorrow. She ended the call before her mother could press further. Overhead, the rain had finally stopped. Through gaps in the canopy, stars appeared. Cold, distant, indifferent to human suffering or the ghosts that suffering could create. Jennifer thought of Keiko Yamada, 22 years old and pregnant and terrified, walking into a creek with pockets full of stones. Thought of 24 years of cold, of rage that could possess the living, of loneliness so complete it became malevolent, and she thought of her daughter, safe and warm 300 miles away, unaware of how close she'd come to losing her mother to the thin place, to the spaces where the dead waited for the living to make mistakes. The forest had taken Keiko Yamada in 1987, had kept her spirit trapped in rage and isolation until 2011, until a kind-hearted ranger tried to help and became a vessel instead. Had almost taken Megan Price permanently, had almost taken Jennifer too, had almost spread its curse to everyone who entered the Ho wilderness. But not tonight. Tonight the thin place had closed, the shrine had burned, and the cold had released its grip on 3 living souls. Jennifer reached the trailhead as false dawn began to gray the eastern sky. Her Jeep sat exactly where she'd left it 31 hours ago. She climbed in, started the engine, let the heat blast until feeling returned to her fingers. On the passenger seat, her phone buzzed with a message. From Rebecca. Megan stable, no physical injuries, severe dehydration and hypothermia but recovering. What the hell happened out there? Jennifer typed a response. Long story. Tell you over coffee when I'm back. But she wouldn't. Not the real story. Some things lived better as silence, as private knowledge, as scars carried quietly so others could sleep peacefully. She put the Jeep in gear and drove away from the Hoh rainforest, away from the thin place, toward home and daughter, and the illusion of safety she would never quite believe in again. Behind her in the forest, morning mist rose from the creeks and streams. The trees dripped with normal moisture. Birds began their dawn chorus. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, completely benign. But Jennifer knew better now, would always know better. The forest kept its secrets, and some of those secrets had teeth. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Robert Fitzgerald had been staring at the photographs for 20 minutes before he noticed the trees were bleeding. Not sap. The birches surrounding Taylor Armstrong's abandoned camp wept something darker, thicker, freezing in black rivulets down white bark. His camera had captured what his eyes had refused to process. Every tree within 50 yards bore the same carved symbol, some Nordic rune he didn't recognize, cut deep enough to reach heartwood. The wind had died completely. In 60 miles of Alaskan wilderness, nothing made a sound. He'd been with Alaska's backcountry Sayar for 8 months now. Long enough to recognize wrong when he saw it, short enough that people still whispered about Colorado behind his back. Emily's name followed him like a shadow, even here, even 3,000 miles from the mountain that had taken her. The transfer to Denali was supposed to be a fresh start. Remote. Quiet. A place where the past couldn't find him in the vastness. Taylor Armstrong's emergency beacon had activated 48 hours ago at coordinates deep in the Toklat River Valley. 23 years old, experienced backpacker, solo permit for a 2-week circuit through some of the park's most isolated terrain. The beacon signal had transmitted for exactly 14 minutes before going silent. Standard protocol suggested equipment malfunction, maybe a fall, possibly a bear encounter, though it was late September and most grizzlies were focused on final feeding before denning. Robert had volunteered immediately for the search. Always did. Something about the missing gnawed at him in ways he couldn't explain to the therapist he'd stopped seeing. The helicopter had dropped him at the coordinates that morning, rotors beating against autumn air that tasted of coming snow. Pilot said he'd be back in 72 hours unless Robert called for emergency extraction. The Garmin Montana 650 on his belt showed the return flight path highlighted in blue, a technological lifeline back to civilization. His Motorola radio crackled once, routine check-in with Wonder Lake Ranger Station, then settled into the white noise of distance and mountains. Taylor's camp sat in a clearing beside a nameless tributary, tent still standing but the fly sheet torn in long vertical slashes. Not bare damage, too precise, too deliberate. The spacing suggested fingers, if fingers were strong enough to shred ripstop nylon like tissue paper. Robert's first thought was vandalism, maybe other hikers, but the location made that unlikely. This was country that saw maybe a dozen people a year. The park's visitor statistics for this drainage: 0 recorded parties in the past 5 years. The Nikon D90 had been Robert's suggestion from the department, documenting evidence for later analysis. 47 photographs so far. The camp laid out like an archaeological site. Everything precisely where Taylor had left it, except the sleeping bag, which was gone entirely. Backpack still hanging from the bear pole, food cache undisturbed, water filter on the ground beside a half-full Nalgene bottle. And everywhere carved into trees, scratched into the permafrost soil, even scraped across flat river stones, that symbol. Robert wasn't an expert on Norse runes, but he'd seen enough History Channel documentaries to recognize the general style. This one looked like an R bisected by a vertical line with 2 diagonal branches, something that might mean protection or warning or death depending on context. The cuts were fresh, wood still pale and weeping. Someone had carved dozens of them, maybe hundreds, working in expanding circles from Taylor's tent as the center point. His bench-made bushcrafter knife came out automatically, fingers finding the familiar weight. 3 years ago, he'd carried it into the Rockies searching for Emily. Hadn't helped then either. He knelt beside the nearest carved tree, photographing the symbol from multiple angles, noting the depth and precision of the cuts. Not done with a pocket knife. Something heavier, sharper, wielded with considerable force. The bark surrounding each carving showed signs of impact trauma, like someone had struck the tree repeatedly rather than carefully etching. The silence pressed against his eardrums. September in interior. Alaska should still have birdsong, squirrels chattering in the spruce, maybe the distant bugle of a bull moose. Instead, nothing. The tributary ran soundlessly over stones, as if the water had forgotten how to speak. Robert's breath misted in air that had dropped 10 degrees in the past hour, temperature plummeting toward freezing despite the afternoon sun still visible above the Alaska Range peaks. He found the first blood at the tree line. Not much. A spray pattern on the underside of a devil's club leaf, rusty brown against green, already oxidized. The chemical test strip from his SAR pack turned positive for human hemoglobin. Robert photographed it, marked the location on his GPS, and followed the obvious trail deeper into the spruce forest. The trees here were old growth, some with trunks 4 feet across, their canopy blocking most direct sunlight and creating a permanent twilight at ground level. Permafrost kept roots shallow, and fallen giants lay everywhere in various stages of decay, nurse logs sprouting new life from dead wood. The blood trail led north, away from the river, up a gradual slope toward higher elevation. Every 20 meters, another carved symbol, another marker in a language Robert didn't understand but increasingly suspected he should. His radio hissed with static. He pulled it from his belt, thumbed the transmit button. Wonder Lake, this is Fitzgerald. Radio check, over. More static, no response. The Montana 650 showed full satellite coverage, 5 bars, position locked. Communication failure didn't make sense given the clear line of sight to the relay tower on Mount Healy. Robert tried again. Got the same white noise that wasn't quite random, that almost sounded like breathing if breathing came from something with lungs full of gravel. Wonderful, he muttered, clipping the radio back. The satellite phone in his pack remained as backup, though he'd need to reach higher ground for reliable signal. Something to remember if this went bad. The blood trail ended at a stone. Not a stone, a standing stone, a menhir, rising 8 feet from the forest floor and covered entirely in carved runes. This wasn't fresh work. These symbols had been here for centuries, weathered by time and acid rain, moss filling the deeper cuts. Robert circled it slowly, photographing every angle. The granite was wrong for this area, transported from somewhere else, deliberately placed in a clearing that shouldn't exist given the density of surrounding forest. At the stone's base, Taylor Armstrong's sleeping bag, laid out carefully, almost ceremonially. Empty, zipped completely closed from the inside. Robert's heart rate spiked, that familiar tightness in his chest that the therapist called hypervigilance and he called survival instinct. He knelt, pulled on nitrile gloves and carefully opened the sleeping bag. More blood inside, saturated through the down insulation. Too much for survivability. If Taylor had bled this much, she was already dead. The smell hit him a moment later. Copper and rot, but under that something else. Something that reminded him of the decomp training scenarios, except accelerated, concentrated, fundamentally wrong. Behind the standing stone, the ground dropped away. A valley opened before him, steep-sided and narrow, invisible from any approach except this exact angle. The topographic maps on his GPS showed nothing. Blank space between contour lines, as if the cartographers had simply skipped this drainage. Impossible, given modern satellite imaging, but there it was, a void in the data. The valley floor lay maybe 300 feet down, accessible via a game trail that switched back through broken talus, and at the valley's center, clearly visible even from this distance, stood structures. Not modern structures. Stone walls, partially collapsed, arranged in rectangular patterns that suggested longhouses or burial halls. Robert had seen photographs of Viking settlements in Newfoundland, Lonso Meadows, the only confirmed Norse site in North America. This looked similar but larger, more permanent, as if someone had built not a temporary camp but an actual colony deep in interior Alaska where no Vikings should have ever been. The academic part of his brain, the part that still worked, despite 3 years of grief and guilt, recognized the historical impossibility. Vikings reached North America around 1000 CE, established brief settlements in Newfoundland, possibly explored further south along the Atlantic coast. But interior Alaska, 4,000 miles from the nearest documented Norse presence, archaeologically impossible. The structures existed anyway. Robert activated the Montana 650's track log, marking this location as a critical waypoint. Whatever had happened to Taylor Armstrong, it connected to that valley and those impossible buildings. He started down the game trail, Benchmade knife in one hand, bear spray in the other, knowing neither would help if he was right about what he was walking into. The descent took 40 minutes through increasingly difficult terrain. The temperature dropped with each switchback, far beyond what elevation change alone could explain. By the time Robert reached the valley floor, his breath came in thick clouds, and frost rimed the rocks around him. The Montana showed 28°O, impossible for mid-afternoon in September. But the GPS didn't lie about temperature any more than it lied about coordinates. The structures were ruins, but recent ruins. Stone walls still stood to shoulder height in places, mortared with what looked like clay mixed with something organic. Peat, maybe, or animal fat. The construction technique matched descriptions of Norse building methods: dry-stacked stone foundation, turf walls above, long rectangular footprint. 3 main buildings arranged in a U-shape around a central courtyard, with several smaller outbuildings behind. And in the courtyard, arranged in a perfect circle, bodies. Not skeletons. Bodies. Preserved by permafrost and something else, something Robert didn't have a name for. 37 individuals by his quick count, all dressed in clothing that belonged to a museum, wool and leather and primitive weaving. Most sat upright, frozen in positions of attention or prayer or supplication. Their skin had the leathery texture of natural mummification, lips pulled back from yellowed teeth, eyes sunken but somehow still present, watching. Robert documented everything with the Nikon, hands shaking enough that he had to brace against a wall for stable shots. This was impossible. This was a find that would rewrite American archaeology. This was also deeply, fundamentally wrong in ways that made his hindbrain scream warnings his conscious mind tried to rationalize away. At the circle's center stood one figure different from the rest, taller, broader, dressed in what might have once been armor, leather, and iron fragments still clinging to the massive frame. This one didn't sit. It stood, arms crossed over its chest, head tilted back as if frozen mid-roar. The preservation here was perfect, too perfect. Skin still showing faint color, muscles still suggesting bulk and power. Around its neck, a massive iron collar, inscribed with runes identical to those on the standing stone above. Robert circled the courtyard, staying well back from the bodies, photographing everything. His radio hissed constantly now, that breathing sound louder, more insistent. The satellite phone showed no signal despite clear sky overhead. The Montana 650 continued tracking his position with perfect accuracy, but couldn't find the cellular network that should have been accessible from this elevation. He found Taylor Armstrong in the largest building. The longhouse's interior was dark, preserved by stone walls and collapsed turf roof. Robert's Petzl headlamp cut through shadows, revealing more impossibilities. The Vikings who'd lived here hadn't just survived. They'd thrived. Storage areas still contained artifacts, iron tools, carved whalebone, what looked like primitive scientific instruments, and along the back wall, carved into the stone itself, a massive genealogical tree, names in runic script extending down through what must have been generations. Taylor lay at the tree's base, positioned carefully, almost lovingly, still alive, barely. Robert was beside her in an instant, fingers finding her carotid pulse. Weak, thready. Her skin was ice against his gloves. The sleeping bag blood made sense now. Defensive wounds across both forearms, deep parallel gashes that had soaked through her jacket and base layers. Her eyes opened, pupils blown wide with shock and something else, something that looked like understanding. "Don't," she whispered, vocal cords barely working. "Don't. Let it. Taylor, I'm Robert Fitzgerald, Alaska SAR. I'm getting you out of here." Standard response, calm voice, hands already assessing her injuries. The wounds were bad but not immediately fatal. With treatment, IV fluids, warmth, she might make it. He reached for his satellite phone. Her hand caught his wrist with surprising strength. "Guardian," she managed. "Draugr, don't disturb." The word meant nothing to Robert. Old Norse, maybe. Viking terminology. Didn't matter. What mattered was the emergency medical protocols flooding back through 3 years of trying to forget. Pressure on the wounds, emergency blanket from his pack, satellite phone to call for immediate helicopter extraction even if he had to hike to high ground for signal. Behind him, stone scraped against stone. Robert turned. The doorway framed against afternoon light showed the central courtyard. The standing figure, the one in armor, had moved. Not much, just a slight shift of weight, head tilted forward instead of back, but movement where there should be none, animation where there should be only preserved death. "It wakes at sunset," Taylor breathed. "Every sunset has to complete the circle. 37 souls bound. Needs 38. The temperature plummeted. Robert's breath now came in dense fog, ice crystals forming in the air itself. The Petzl headlamp flickered despite fresh batteries installed that morning. Shadows lengthened in ways that ignored the sun's actual position, reaching across the courtyard like fingers. The figure in the center took a step forward. Not shambling, not the slow shuffle of movie zombies. This moved with purpose, with power, joints flexing impossibly after however many centuries. The leathery skin split across massive shoulders, revealing something underneath that wasn't muscle or bone, but something that looked carved from frozen midnight. The iron collar around its neck blazed with sudden heat, runes glowing red against black metal. Robert pulled Taylor to her feet, got her weight against his shoulder. "We're leaving, now." "Can't outrun it," she said. "Can't. It's faster than anything, stronger than anything. I tried. The Benchmade knife was laughable against that thing. Bear spray designed for grizzlies wouldn't slow something that had been dead for centuries. Robert's mind raced through options, training, protocols that didn't cover Viking undead awakening in Alaskan wilderness. The emergency blanket went around Taylor, his arms supporting most of her weight, and he started for the doorway. The figure stepped into their path. Up close, the wrongness was total. What Robert had taken for preserved flesh was something else. Permafrost packed around a frame of bone and something darker, something that suggested occupation rather than resurrection. The eyes opened, revealing not sockets but depths, abyssal spaces that went down and down into nothing. The mouth opened, and the sound that emerged wasn't breath or voice but the grinding of continental plates, the boom of calving glaciers, every sound of deep earth and ancient cold compressed into something approximating language. "Gravrova," it said. The word echoed in Robert's skull, bypassing his ears entirely. "Vuktu. Binda." Taylor whimpered. "Grave. Grave robber. Guardian. Binding." The creature's hand moved faster than Robert could track. Fingers that should have been stiff with death closed around his throat with crushing strength, lifting him clear off the ground. The Benchmade clattered away, bear spray useless. His vision tunneled, oxygen cut off, legs kicking uselessly. Emily's face flooded his thoughts. Not the Emily he'd lost, but the Emily who'd smiled at him over coffee, who'd trusted him to lead that last climb, who'd looked at him with absolute faith before the anchor failed, and she'd fallen, and the rope had... The grip released. Robert collapsed, gasping, throat bruised but functional. Taylor had pulled herself upright despite her wounds, blood-soaked hands pressing against the creature's armored back, voice hoarse but determined. "Lida! Frieder!" The thing paused. That massive head swiveled, regarding Taylor with something that might have been recognition. She continued in broken Norse, words Robert didn't understand but that clearly carried meaning. The creature responded, that grinding voice forming syllables that hurt to hear, and Robert understood with sudden terrible clarity that this was a conversation. That Taylor somehow spoke its language, that she'd been here long enough to learn more than just how to survive. "It wants completion," Taylor translated, never breaking eye contact with the Guardian. 37 souls bound to protect this place. Need 38 for the circle, for the binding to hold. It thinks we're grave robbers, disturbing the settlement. "We're not robbers," Robert croaked, voice damaged. "We're rescuers. She's injured. I need to get her medical attention," Taylor translated. The creature's response was immediate and final, one word that resonated through the valley. "Nay." "It says we disturbed the barrier, broke the runes. By entering, we accepted the terms. One of us joins the circle. One of us can leave." The arithmetic was simple. Emily had died because Robert made a bad call, wouldn't make the same mistake twice, couldn't. The therapy sessions flashed through his mind. Survivor's guilt, PTSD, the tendency to seek redemption through self-sacrifice. All true. Didn't matter. "Take her," Robert said. "I'll stay. Join your circle. Complete the binding. She goes free." Taylor grabbed his arm. "No, you don't understand what it means. Not just death. Consciousness preserved. Awareness eternal. Guarding this place forever. It's not mercy. It's hell. Tell it I accept." The creature's hand descended, not grabbing but almost gentle, pressing against Robert's chest directly over his heart. The cold that radiated from that touch went beyond physical, beyond temperature, into something fundamental. His heartbeat slowed, synchronized with something ancient and terrible. Frost spread across his jacket, crystallizing moisture, and Robert understood that acceptance had consequences he couldn't imagine. But Taylor would live. That was enough. She was screaming something, fighting against the Guardian's grip, and Robert couldn't hear her anymore because the cold had reached his ears, his eyes, his thoughts. The valley spun, permafrost rising to meet him, and the last thing he saw before the ice claimed his vision was Emily's face, not falling but smiling, not dead but alive, telling him it was okay. He could rest now. He could finally rest. He woke standing in the circle. Time had passed. Minutes or days, impossible to tell. His body didn't respond to thought anymore, frozen in place. But his mind remained completely agonizingly aware. The other 37 figures surrounded him, and he could feel them now, consciousnesses pressed against his own. Viking souls bound for centuries to protect their settlement from desecration. They screamed without voices, wept without tears, begged for release without words. Robert tried to scream, and couldn't. The Guardian stood in the center as always, arms crossed, but now Robert understood its purpose. Not malevolent, not evil. Bound by the same curse it enforced, the leader who'd accepted eternal service to protect his people's bones, who'd volunteered for this hell when some ancient shaman offered the choice. The iron collar wasn't decoration. It was a leash, linking the Guardian to this place until the settlement crumbled to nothing or someone completed whatever ritual might break the binding. Taylor Armstrong was gone. The Petzl headlamp lay abandoned in the courtyard, batteries dead, plastic cracked from cold. Robert's pack sat beside it, ransacked, emergency supplies scattered. She'd taken what she could carry, satellite phone, GPS, first aid kit, and fled. Smart. Survivor. She'd make it out, call for extraction, tell a story no one would believe about ancient Vikings and walking corpses. Would she mention Robert? Probably not. Easier to say he died in the rescue attempt, fell or hypothermia or bear attack. Anything but the truth. Sunset came and went. The Guardian walked the perimeter, checking each carved rune, each binding symbol. The ritual repeated, and Robert understood it would repeat every day forever, until the sun consumed the earth or the mountains wore to sand. His consciousness remained perfect, pristine, aware of every passing second. He tried to count. Lost track after 10,000. Tried to sleep. Couldn't. Tried to think of Emily. Happy memories to sustain him. But the binding didn't allow comfort. Only service. Only watchfulness. Only the eternal preservation of duty. The winter came. Snow buried the valley, drifted against the stone walls, covered the circle of guardians. Robert stood through it all, ice forming on his frozen skin, awareness undimmed. Spring melt revealed him unchanged, and the cycle continued. A year might have passed. A decade. Time lost meaning when every moment was identical. Every sunset triggering the Guardian's walk. Every dawn finding the circle unbroken. He saw them sometimes. Hikers, researchers, adventurers who somehow found the valley, despite GPS coordinates that shouldn't exist. The Guardian took them all. The circle expanded. 38, 39, 40 souls bound to protect stone ruins that no one remembered, defending a settlement that history had forgotten. Robert Fitzgerald tried to remember his name. Couldn't. Tried to remember why he'd come here. The answer dissolved like snow in sunlight. Tried to remember what he'd sacrificed for. A girl. Taylor. No. Emily. Both. Neither. The only constant was the cold and the awareness and the eternal vigil. Years became decades, became centuries, and still he stood, conscious and screaming in a body that couldn't scream. Part of a circle protecting something that no longer mattered to anyone but the dead who guarded it. The mountains eroded. The forest grew and died and grew again. The longhouses collapsed entirely, stones scattered by frost, heave, and time. The circle remained, and Robert Fitzgerald, who'd come to Alaska to escape his past, discovered that some burdens last forever, that some debts can't be paid, that choosing redemption is easy, but living it, truly living it, conscious and aware and eternal, is the real price no one warns you about. The Guardian walked. Robert stood. The circle held. And in the silence of endless service, he finally understood. This was never about Taylor Armstrong or Viking ruins or even Emily's ghost. This was about discovering that death might be mercy, but awareness is forever. The sun set. The sun rose. The Guardian walked. Robert stood. Forever. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Robert Fitzgerald had been staring at the search grid map for 20 minutes before he noticed the dates. Not the current date, October 23, 2013, but the penciled annotations in the margins of the decades-old map he'd found in the ranger station archives. 9/15/87, J. Martinez experienced. 10/8/94, K. Thompson, solo backpacker. 9/22/01, D. Winters, former guide. 7 names total, 7 disappearances, all within a 2-mile radius of where Ashley Nguyen's tent had been found that morning, all during new moon phases. And tonight the sky would be completely dark again. Fitzgerald pressed his knuckles against his temples, trying to force away the headache that had been building since dawn. 2 years at Olympic National Park, 2 years of deliberately choosing the quietest post he could find after what happened in Kentucky. The Hoh rainforest was supposed to be peaceful, just moss and ancient trees and the constant whisper of rain. No caves, no confined spaces, no partners to lose. The Garmin eTrex 20 on his desk showed the coordinates where a day hiker had found Nguyen's camp at first light. 47.8394 degren, 123.9347 degrees W, elevation 872 feet, roughly 4 miles up the Hoh River Trail, where it forked toward the Seven Lakes Basin. The tent had been properly staked, her pack inside with food still sealed in bear canisters. Her permits indicated she was an experienced backpacker, 32 years old, a biology teacher from Portland, who'd hiked the Pacific Crest Trail twice, the kind of person who didn't just wander off. Fitzgerald's Motorola XPR radio crackled. "Fitzgerald, this is dispatch. Search teams assembling. Chen wants to know if you're coordinating or just observing. He picked up the radio, thumb hesitating over the transmit button. District Ranger Chen knew his history, knew why Fitzgerald had transferred from Kentucky, knew about the sealed incident report that used words like severe trauma and extended leave. For 18 months, Chen had kept him on light duties, trail maintenance, permit checks, educational programs. No search and rescue, no coordination, until this morning, when Chen had specifically requested him for the briefing. "Tell Chen I'll coordinate," Fitzgerald said into the radio. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'm reviewing the historical data now. There's something he needs to see." He spread the archived map across his desk alongside the current topographical chart. The disappearances formed a rough circle, maybe 1.5 miles in diameter, centered on an area the old map labeled Fisher's Clearing, abandoned 1962. His computer showed nothing about why it had been abandoned. The area wasn't restricted, wasn't marked as hazardous. Just a gap in the records. Fitzgerald pulled up the incident reports on the disappearances he could access digitally. The 3 most recent ones from 1994, 2001, and 2008 all shared similar elements. Experienced hikers, solo or separated from groups, vanished during new moon periods, minimal trace evidence. One report from 2001 mentioned unusual markings on nearby trees, but included no photographs or descriptions. The 2008 report noted that the missing person's tent had been found arranged as if the occupant intended to return momentarily, just like Ashley Nguyen's tent. His cell phone buzzed. No signal, just the 7:30 a.m. alarm he'd forgotten to cancel. Through the ranger station window, the rainforest looked the way it always did in late October. Perpetually green, perpetually wet. The morning light filtering through layers of Sitka spruce and western hemlock in diffuse gray-green columns. Moss covered everything. Nurse logs, standing trunks, even the lower branches. During his first month here, the overwhelming greenness had seemed peaceful. Now it felt like camouflage. Fitzgerald loaded his pack with methodical precision, each item a ritual against the tightness in his chest. Bench-made bushcrafter knife, Leatherman Wave multi-tool, wilderness first aid kit, 3 extra radio batteries, waterproof matches, emergency beacon, 6 protein bars, 2 liters of water. His hands remembered the motions from hundreds of searches before Kentucky, before Elena. He forced the thought away and added paper maps to the pack. The Garmin was reliable, but the rainforest's canopy could scatter GPS signals into uselessness. He'd learned not to trust technology alone. The search team gathered in the parking lot at 8:15 a.m. 6 rangers, 2 volunteers from the local SAR unit, and District Ranger Chen, a compact woman in her 50s who'd spent 30 years in the Park Service. She nodded to Fitzgerald as he approached. "Glad you're taking point on this," Chen said quietly. "I know it's been a while. I've reviewed the case file," Fitzgerald said, not meeting her eyes, "and the historical data. We need to talk about the pattern." He spread the archived map on the hood of Chen's truck, pointing to the penciled annotations. 7 disappearances since 1987, all within this area, all during new moon phases. Ashley Nguyen makes 8. One of the SAR volunteers, a lean man named Porter with a graying beard, leaned closer. "New moon? That's some kind of cult thing?" "I don't know what it is," Fitzgerald admitted, "but the pattern's clear, and tonight's the new moon." Chen studied the map, her expression unreadable. "You're saying we have until nightfall." "I'm saying we should assume time matters." The team divided into 3 pairs, each taking a sector radiating from Nguyen's campsite. Fitzgerald partnered with Porter, who'd been doing SR work in Olympic for 15 years. They headed up the Ho River Trail as the morning rain began. Not a downpour, just the constant misting drizzle that defined the rainforest. The trail followed the Ho River through old-growth forest. Trees that had been standing for 500 years rose like cathedral pillars, their trunks 10 feet across, their canopy so dense the understory existed in permanent twilight. Moss hung in curtains from branches, Sword ferns grew waist-high between nurse logs where hemlock seedlings sprouted from the decomposing wood of fallen giants. Fitzgerald had always found the biomass density unsettling, the sheer volume of life and death happening simultaneously. Every fallen tree became a nursery. Every living tree stood on the bones of its predecessors. The whole forest was a graveyard and a nursery at once. Porter moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew these trails intimately. "You really think there's a pattern?" he asked as they hiked. "Could just be coincidence. People get lost out here." "People get lost everywhere," Fitzgerald said. "But experienced hikers don't usually vanish from properly set camps with all their gear intact." They reached Nguyen's campsite at 9:47 a.m. The tent stood in a small clearing 30 feet from the trail, a quality REI two-person model, rain fly properly secured, no visible damage. Crime scene tape marked the perimeter. Fitzgerald ducked under it, noting that the ground around the tent showed no signs of struggle. The tent's interior was visible through the open flap. Sleeping bag neatly rolled, camp stove assembled as if Nguyen had been preparing breakfast, her pack leaning against the tent's corner with a water bottle in the side pocket. "This is what bothers me," Fitzgerald said, crouching by the tent entrance. "Everything suggests she stepped away for a minute, maybe to go to the bathroom, maybe to get water from the river. But her headlamp's still in the tent. Who walks into this forest before dawn without a light?" Porter circled the campsite slowly, studying the ground. "Could have had a second light. Lots of people carry backups." "Maybe." Fitzgerald pulled on nitrile gloves and carefully examined the tent's interior. Nguyen's permit and ID were in a waterproof pouch attached to her pack. Her cell phone sat in the tent's mesh pocket. Dead battery, but that was normal out here. No signal anyway. A paperback novel lay spine up beside the sleeping bag, The Terror by Dan Simmons. Fitzgerald felt his stomach tighten at the title. He backed out of the tent and stood looking at the surrounding forest. The trees here were massive, their trunks disappearing into the canopy 70 feet overhead. Moss covered the ground in a thick carpet that muffled sound. The constant drip of condensation from the canopy created a rhythm like whispered breathing. "Let's establish a search radius," Fitzgerald said. "Standard protocol, concentric circles from the point last seen, focus on water sources and natural corridors." They spent the next 3 hours working outward from the campsite in careful sweeps, calling Nguyen's name, looking for any trace. The Ho River ran about 100 yards west, its water gray-green and cold from glacier melt higher in the Olympics. They checked the riverbank for signs she might have gone for water and slipped. Nothing. At 1:15 p.m., Porter found the first marker. "Fitzgerald, you need to see this." Porter stood beside a massive Sitka spruce about 200 yards northeast of the camp. The tree's trunk was easily 12 feet in diameter, its bark thick and rough. Carved into the bark at chest height was a symbol, 3 parallel lines, each about 6 inches long, cut deep enough to expose the lighter wood beneath. The cuts looked recent, no weathering, no sap oxidation. Fitzgerald photographed the symbol with his digital camera, then pulled out his knife and carefully scraped a small sample of the exposed wood into an evidence bag. "This wasn't in any of the reports I read." "Looks like claw marks," Porter said, "but the spacing's wrong for bear and too high for cougar." Fitzgerald studied the cuts. Porter was right. The spacing suggested something with a wider grip than any animal in these forests. And the depth was uniform, as if made with tools rather than claws. The 2001 report mentioned unusual markings on trees, no details about what kind. They continued the search pattern, and within 30 minutes found 3 more marked trees, all within a quarter-mile radius of Nguyen's camp, all with the same 3-line symbol at approximately the same height. Fitzgerald marked each location on his GPS and added them to the paper map. The marks formed a rough diamond shape with the campsite near the center. Porter noticed it too. "That's deliberate. Someone's marking territory. Or marking something else," Fitzgerald said quietly. His radio crackled with check-ins from the other search teams. No traces found, no response to calls. The forest swallowed sound like it swallowed light. At 3:30 p.m., with daylight already starting to fade under the thick canopy, Fitzgerald called for the teams to regroup at Nguyen's camp. The temperature had dropped and the mist had thickened into proper rain. Water dripped from every surface, turning the forest into a maze of gray-green shadows. Chen arrived with her team, both looking frustrated. Nothing, it's like she evaporated. Fitzgerald showed her the photographs of the tree markings. These are recent, all within a quarter-mile of the camp, and they form a pattern. Chen studied the images, her expression troubled. Could be another hiker, some kind of trail marker system. At chest height? Cut that deep? Fitzgerald shook his head. And why only around this specific area? The third team arrived, 2 rangers named Morrison and Blake. Morrison looked pale despite the hike. We found something. About a half-mile north, there's a clearing. Old foundation, looks like it might be the abandoned site from your map. And there's... He hesitated. There's more of those markings. A lot more. The teams hiked to the clearing together, arriving as the already dim forest light began failing toward evening. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 60 feet across. The forest canopy broken enough to allow actual sky visibility, a rarity in the Ho rainforest. Concrete foundation blocks emerged from the moss like broken teeth, arranged in a rectangle that suggested a structure roughly 20 by 30 feet. Rotted wood beams lay collapsed among the blocks, and every tree surrounding the clearing bore the 3-line markings. Dozens of them, all at the same height, all facing inward toward the clearing's center. Jesus, Porter whispered. How long would this take? Fitzgerald approached the nearest marked tree slowly, his boots squelching in the saturated moss. Up close, the cuts looked even stranger, too clean, too precise, as if made with surgical instruments rather than tools. He touched the exposed wood and found it cold, far colder than the ambient temperature justified. In the clearing's center, the moss had been disturbed recently. Someone or something had scraped away the thick green carpet to expose the dark soil beneath. The exposed area formed a circle about 6 feet in diameter, and in the center of that circle, driven point down into the earth, stood an arrow, not a modern arrow. The shaft was wood, hand-carved, the fletching made from what looked like bird feathers. The arrowhead was stone, napped flint or obsidian, its edges sharp enough to catch the dying light. The arrow stood perfectly vertical, as if it had been placed rather than shot. No one approached it. The entire team stood at the clearing's edge, staring. That's not recreational, Chen said finally. That's ceremonial. Fitzgerald felt his pulse hammering in his temples. The arrow triggered something in his memory. Not from Kentucky, but from earlier, from training. He'd taken a cultural awareness course during his first year with the Park Service, learning about the indigenous history of various park regions. The Olympic Peninsula had been home to multiple tribes, the Quileute, the Ho, the Quinault, and the arrow looked like artifacts he'd seen in museum photographs. We need to document this and get out, Fitzgerald said. His voice came out tight. It's going to be full dark in 30 minutes. We can't leave Nguyen out here, Morrison protested. We also can't search effectively in darkness in this terrain, Chen said. We'll set up a base camp at the trailhead, rotate teams through the night for listening posts. If she calls out, we'll hear her. Fitzgerald photographed the arrow in the clearing from multiple angles, while the others marked the location on their GPS units. As he worked, the forest around them seemed to grow quieter. The constant drip of rain continued, but the small sounds, birds, insects, the rustle of small animals, faded into silence. Porter noticed it too. Where'd all the noise go? The team retreated from the clearing as darkness fell, hiking back down the trail with headlamps cutting narrow tunnels through the blackness. The forest at night felt fundamentally different from the forest in daylight. The moss-covered trees became grotesque shapes. Every shadow suggested movement, and the silence persisted, broken only by their footsteps and breathing. They reached the trailhead at 6:45 p.m. Chen organized the night rotation while Fitzgerald uploaded his photographs to his laptop in the ranger station. The images of the arrow looked even more disturbing on screen. Ancient and deliberate, a marker for something the concrete foundation blocks had tried to contain or commemorate. He opened a browser and started researching, though his internet connection was slow and spotty. Most results for Olympic Peninsula indigenous history returned tourist information and general cultural overviews. He refined the search. Ho Tribe Arrows Ceremony. Most results were still generic, but one caught his attention. A scanned academic paper from 1973 titled Mortuary Practices and Spiritual Beliefs of the Coastal Salish Peoples. He skimmed through dense anthropological text until he found a passage that made his hand stop moving on the keyboard. Among certain Quinault and Ho informants, stories persist of the Baycock, a skeletal spirit borrowed from Ojibwe tradition through intertribal contact, but adapted to local cosmology. This entity was said to hunt at night, particularly during dark moon phases, using invisible arrows to strike down the living. The spirit was associated with warriors who died dishonorably, or with those who violated sacred spaces. Protective rituals involved the placement of marked trees and blessed arrows to contain or redirect the entity's hunting grounds. Fitzgerald read the passage 3 times, his chest growing tight. Baycock. The word felt heavy in his mind, loaded with meanings he didn't fully understand but instinctively feared. He searched for more information, finding fragments across different sources. The Baycock flew through forests, its skeletal body making sounds like rattling bones. It consumed the livers of its victims. It could not be killed by conventional means because it was already dead. A spirit of vengeance and hunger, and it hunted during the darkest nights, when the living could not see it coming. Outside the ranger station, full night had fallen. Through the window, Fitzgerald could see nothing but his own reflection against the darkness. His radio sat silent on the desk. The listening posts hadn't reported any sounds, any signs of Ashley Nguyen. He thought about the pattern of disappearances, all during new moon phases, all in the area around the abandoned clearing, all experienced hikers who should have known better than to wander off, unless they hadn't wandered, unless something had come for them. Fitzgerald stood and paced the small office, trying to organize his thoughts. This was the trauma speaking, he told himself. The hypervigilance, the pattern-seeking, the tendency to see malevolence in random events. This was what the therapist in Kentucky had warned him about. The way a broken mind tries to impose narrative on chaos because chaos is too painful to accept. Elena hadn't died because of ancient spirits or supernatural vengeance. She'd died because a cave ceiling collapsed, because geology was indifferent to human life, because sometimes bad things happened for no reason at all. But the arrow in the clearing had been real. The tree markings had been real. And 7 people had vanished from the same area under identical circumstances. His phone buzzed. A text from Chen, the brief cellular signal reaching the ranger station. Come to the research library. Found something in the old records. Fitzgerald grabbed his jacket and headed across the compound to the small library that housed historical documents from the park's establishment in 1938. Chen was sitting at a table covered with brittle folders and ledgers, a desk lamp casting harsh shadows across her face. Look at this, she said without preamble, pushing a folder toward him. The folder contained handwritten reports from 1962, the year Fisher's clearing had been abandoned. The writing was cramped and formal, the paper yellowed with age. Fitzgerald read slowly, his eyes adjusting to the old script. Recommend immediate closure of the Fisher's clearing area to public access. The deaths of Daniel Fisher and his son Thomas on the night of September 19th cannot be adequately explained by wildlife attack or accident. The condition of the bodies, recovered September 21st, showed evidence of massive trauma inconsistent with known predators. Local Ho tribal representatives have requested the area be treated as sacred ground and prohibited to visitors. Given the disturbing circumstances and ongoing investigations, I support this restriction. The report was signed by a ranger named Howard Mitchell. Chen had another folder open. There's more. Mitchell filed supplementary reports over the next 6 months. Listen to this one from December 1962. Interviewed elder from Ho tribe who requested anonymity. He states the clearing was site of ancient burial ground disturbed when Fisher built his hunting cabin in 1959. He describes traditional beliefs about guardian spirits that punish those who violate sacred spaces. While I do not endorse supernatural explanations, the elder's knowledge of the area and its history deserves consideration. He recommends the arrow and tree markings not be disturbed, as they represent protective measures. Fitzgerald felt his mouth go dry. What happened to the closure recommendation? That's the thing, Chen said. I can't find any follow-up. No official closure order, no continued investigation. It's like they just stopped documenting it. The area's not restricted, not marked, nothing. It's like someone decided to pretend it didn't happen. Or someone decided documentation was more dangerous than ignorance, Fitzgerald said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment. The old papers spread between them like evidence at a trial. Finally, Chen spoke. You don't actually believe in this, do you? Spirits and curses? Fitzgerald thought about Elena, about the moment the ceiling came down, about the 3 hours he'd spent in darkness listening to her breathing become labored and then stop. He thought about the nightmares that still woke him most nights, the hypervigilance that made him check locks 3 times, the way his hands shook when he had to enter any confined space. I believe people disappear, he said. I believe something in that clearing is dangerous. Whether it's a spirit or a serial killer or some natural phenomenon we don't understand, does the label really matter if people keep dying? Chen closed the folders carefully. What do you want to do? I want to go back, Fitzgerald said, tonight during the new moon. If there's a pattern, if something happens during these specific nights, then that's when we'll find evidence. That's insane, Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. We don't do nighttime searches in this terrain without extraordinary circumstances. 8 people are extraordinary circumstances, Fitzgerald said. And if the pattern holds, tonight's when it happens, when whatever it is hunts. Chen studied him for a long moment. You know I can't authorize this officially. If something happens to you, then it's my choice, Fitzgerald interrupted. I'm not asking for backup. Just give me until dawn. If I'm not back by first light, send the full team. You're really going to hike into the rainforest at night, alone, looking for a spirit that probably doesn't exist because of a pattern that might be coincidence? Fitzgerald thought about Ashley Nguyen, 32 years old, biology teacher, experienced backpacker. He thought about the 7 names penciled in the margins of the old map. He thought about Elena, and about the fact that he'd been the coordinator, the one who decided to enter the cave despite the weather warnings. I have to, he said simply. At 11:30 p.m., Fitzgerald stood at the Ho River trailhead, alone. His pack held emergency gear, 3 days of food, medical supplies, and his Motorola radio. His Benchmade knife hung on his belt. His headlamp cast a narrow beam into the forest, illuminating moss and darkness and nothing beyond. The night was utterly black. No moon, no stars visible through the canopy. Just the sound of rain and the distant rush of the river, and his own breathing too loud in his ears. He started walking. The trail during the day had seemed peaceful, cathedral-like. At night it became a tunnel through hostile territory. His headlamp beam bounced off wet tree trunks and hanging moss, creating shadows that moved when he moved. The sound of his boots on the muddy trail seemed impossibly loud. Every few steps he stopped to listen, hearing nothing but rain and river and his hammering pulse. He'd hiked at night before, many times during search operations, but those had been with teams, with multiple lights, with radio chatter providing human connection. This was different. This was isolation that felt deliberate, as if the forest wanted him alone. At mile 2, his headlamp flickered. Fitzgerald stopped, tapping the light with his palm. It steadied, then flickered again. He checked the batteries. Fresh that morning, should last 8 hours minimum. But the light continued to pulse irregularly, growing dimmer. He pulled out his backup flashlight. It worked for 30 seconds before it too began flickering. Fitzgerald stood very still, forcing himself to breathe slowly despite the panic building in his chest. Light failure could be explained. Moisture, faulty connections, cheap batteries. It didn't mean anything supernatural. It didn't. Then he heard the sound. Distant at first, barely audible over the rain. A clicking, rattling noise, like stones shaken in a bag, or bones knocking together. The sound came from ahead, somewhere up the trail toward the clearing. Fitzgerald switched off his failing headlamp, plunging himself into absolute darkness. He stood frozen, listening. The rattling continued, growing slowly closer. And beneath it, another sound. A dry rushing like wind through dead branches. But there was no wind. The rainforest air was still and heavy. Fitzgerald's hand found the radio on his belt. He lifted it, pressed the transmit button. "Chen, this is Fitzgerald. I'm at mile 2. I'm hearing..." Static exploded from the radio, loud and harsh, making him flinch. He released the button, tried again. Same result. Nothing but white noise interference. The rattling was closer now. Close enough that Fitzgerald could tell it was moving, pacing parallel to the trail somewhere to his right, 20 or 30 yards into the forest. He fumbled his headlamp back on. It flickered weakly, casting a dying yellow glow that barely penetrated 10 feet. In that limited circle of light, he could see the trail ahead, the massive tree trunks on either side, the thick carpet of moss and ferns, and movement in his peripheral vision. Fitzgerald spun, swinging the headlamp beam toward the movement. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and moss. But when he turned back to the trail, he caught movement again, always at the edge of his vision, always vanishing when he looked directly at it. The rattling stopped. In the sudden silence, Fitzgerald heard his own ragged breathing, the drip of rain, the distant river. His hands shook as he drew his knife, the blade catching the headlamp's weak glow. The weapon felt absurd. What good was a knife against something he couldn't even see? A new sound emerged from the darkness ahead, a voice calling his name. "Robert." The voice was Elena's. Fitzgerald's knife hand dropped. His legs went weak. That was impossible. Elena had been dead for 2 years, her body recovered from the collapsed cave, her funeral attended by over 100 people. She couldn't be here, couldn't be calling his name in the Olympic rainforest at midnight. "Robert, I'm here. I found the way out." It was exactly how she'd sounded in the cave, in those 3 hours before she died. Weak, but trying to stay calm, trying to keep him from panicking. "Help me, Robert. It's so dark." Every rational part of Fitzgerald's mind screamed that this was wrong, impossible, a hallucination brought on by stress and trauma and hypervigilance. But his body moved anyway, stumbling forward off the trail, pushing through sword ferns toward the source of the voice. "Elena." His own voice came out cracked, desperate. "I'm scared, Robert. Please don't leave me alone." He crashed through the undergrowth, headlamp beam swinging wildly. Branches caught at his jacket. Moss-covered logs appeared suddenly in his path, making him stumble. But he kept moving toward the voice, toward the impossible possibility that she was here, that she'd somehow survived, that he could save her this time. "Robert." The voice was closer, just ahead. Fitzgerald pushed through a thick curtain of moss and found himself in a small clearing. His headlamp illuminated a figure standing with its back to him, wearing a jacket identical to the one Elena had worn in the cave. "Elena," he whispered. The figure turned. It had Elena's jacket but not her face. Instead, where the face should have been, there was darkness. Not shadow, but absence. A void where features should exist. And as Fitzgerald stared in horror, the darkness peeled back to reveal bone. A skull, yellow-white in the headlamp beam, eye sockets empty and black, jaw hanging open. The skeleton raised one arm, pointing at Fitzgerald. In its bony hand it held a bow, wood and sinew, ancient and wrong. The other hand drew back an arrow made of darkness itself. Fitzgerald threw himself sideways as the skeleton released the arrow. He felt something pass through the air where he'd been standing, felt a cold, so intense it burned like fire. He hit the ground hard, moss cushioning the impact, and scrambled backward on hands and knees. The skeleton advanced, rattling with each step, its empty eye sockets somehow tracking him. It reached for another arrow from a quiver that hadn't been visible before, drawing back the bowstring with mechanical precision. Fitzgerald ran. He crashed back through the ferns, tearing through moss curtains, his headlamp beam bouncing uselessly as branches whipped his face. Behind him he could hear the rattling pursuit, clicking and scraping like something assembling itself from scattered parts. His foot caught on a root, and he went down hard, driving the air from his lungs. He rolled onto his back, gasping, and saw the skeleton emerge from the undergrowth. It moved wrong, joints bending at angles that defied anatomy, limbs extending beyond human proportion. The skull tilted, examining him with eyeless attention. Then it spoke, and the voice was Elena's again. "Why did you leave me in the dark, Robert?" "You're not real," Fitzgerald gasped. "You're not her. I was alone for so long, so cold, and you never came back." The skeleton drew another arrow, this one solid, the arrowhead gleaming stone. It aimed at Fitzgerald's chest. He scrambled backward, hand finding a rock in the moss. He threw it desperately. The rock passed through the skeleton as if through empty air, clattering into the undergrowth beyond. The arrow released. Fitzgerald felt impact, not physical, but a cold that drove into his chest like a spike of ice. His heart stuttered, missing beats, and suddenly he couldn't breathe. The forest spun around him, gravity becoming negotiable. He was falling and standing simultaneously, the ground beneath him both solid and absent. Through graying vision, he saw the skeleton advance. Its skull lowered to examine him, so close he could see the fine cracks in the bone, the empty socket somehow conveying satisfaction. Then it raised its skull and looked past Fitzgerald, towards something in the forest. The jaw dropped open in what might have been rage or hunger or recognition. The skeleton released Fitzgerald, the cold spike vanishing from his chest, his lungs filling with air in a desperate gasp, and turned away, moving back into the forest with that wrong, jointed gait. The rattling faded, replaced by other sounds, distant screaming or wind, or something between the two. Fitzgerald lay gasping in the moss, his entire body shaking. His headlamp had gone out completely. Darkness pressed against him from all sides, absolute and suffocating. He fumbled for his backup flashlight with numb fingers, found it, clicked it on. The beam worked, steady and bright. He swept it around the clearing, seeing only normal forest, ferns, moss, trees, no skeleton, no impossible archer, just the rainforest at night. But his chest still ached where the arrow had struck, and when he pressed his hand there, his fingers came away cold enough to hurt. He forced himself to stand, every movement requiring conscious effort. His legs trembled. His vision kept trying to tunnel, but he stayed upright, the flashlight clutched in one hand, his knife in the other. The screaming sound came again from deeper in the forest. Not Elena's voice this time. A woman's voice, unfamiliar, calling for help. Ashley Nguyen. Fitzgerald started walking toward the sound, his body moving on autopilot while his mind tried to process what had just happened. The skeleton had been real. He'd felt the arrow's impact, felt the cold that shouldn't exist. But the voice had been Elena's, and Elena was dead, which meant the entity could access his memories, his grief, use them as weapons. The baycock. The papers had said it hunted at night, used arrows, consumed livers, but they hadn't mentioned psychological warfare, hadn't said it could weaponize trauma. The screaming grew louder, more desperate. Fitzgerald pushed through the undergrowth, following the sound, even though every survival instinct screamed at him to run the other direction. But he'd already failed Elena. He'd been the coordinator who made the wrong call, who'd gotten his partner killed. He wasn't going to fail Nguyen too. He broke through into the abandoned clearing. His flashlight beam swept across the concrete foundations, the marked trees, the arrow still standing in the clearing's center. And beyond the arrow, at the clearing's far edge, he saw Ashley Nguyen. She hung suspended in the air between two trees 10 feet off the ground, her arms spread wide as if crucified. No ropes, no visible support, just her body floating in violation of gravity, her head hanging forward, long black hair obscuring her face. "Nguyen!" Fitzgerald shouted, starting toward her. She raised her head. In the flashlight beam, Fitzgerald saw her eyes, completely black, no whites, No iris, just darkness that reflected no light. Her mouth opened, but the voice that emerged was wrong. Layered, like multiple people speaking in unison. 7 before her, 7 after. The clearing demands its tribute. Nguyen's body jerked, pulled backward by invisible forces. Fitzgerald heard a wet, tearing sound, saw something dark drip from her suspended form. Not blood, something darker, thicker, that splattered on the moss below. Then she dropped, hitting the ground in a boneless heap. Fitzgerald ran to her, sliding to his knees beside her body. She was breathing, shallow, rapid, but breathing. He rolled her over carefully, checking for injuries. Her clothing was intact, no visible wounds, but when he pressed his hand to her chest, he felt wrongness, ribs that moved when they shouldn't, organs that seemed misplaced or missing. Her eyes fluttered open, black fading back to brown. "Robert," she whispered. "I'm here," he said, already pulling out his radio. "I'm getting you out." "It took something," she said. Her hand moved to her torso. "I can feel the empty space where it should be." The radio produced only static. Fitzgerald switched to the emergency frequency, then to backup channels. Nothing but white noise on all of them. The rattling started again, multiple sources now surrounding the clearing. Fitzgerald swept his flashlight around and saw them emerging from the forest. Skeletons, 5 of them, each holding a bow, each moving with that wrong articulation of joints. They formed a rough circle around the clearing, cutting off escape routes. And from the forest behind them a larger shape emerged. It was twice the height of the smaller skeletons, its bones massive and ancient, its skull the size of a bear's but humanoid, its jaw bristling with teeth that no human should possess. Wings extended from its back, not feathered but made of ligament and membrane stretched across bone spars, translucent and veined like a bat's. The wings spread 20 feet across, blocking the gaps between trees. The baycock in its true form. It looked down at Fitzgerald with eye sockets that held cold fire, and when it spoke, its voice was every missing person, every scream in the forest's history, every final thought of the dying. "You should not have come. This place remembers violation. This place demands balance." Fitzgerald pulled Nguyen closer, his knife held uselessly in his other hand. "I'm taking her. You can't have her." The baycock's laugh was the sound of bones breaking, of wind through empty skulls. "She is already taken. The liver consumed, the spirit marked. She walks in the space between already." Nguyen clutched at Fitzgerald's jacket. "Don't let it take me," she whispered. "Please. I can feel myself disappearing." The smaller skeletons raised their bows as one, arrows nocked, all pointed at Fitzgerald's chest. The baycock's wings rustled, membrane scraping against bone. 7 before, it said again. 7 after. The pattern completes. The clearing's hunger satisfied for another cycle. Fitzgerald's mind raced through impossible options. He couldn't fight spirits with a knife. He couldn't outrun skeletal archers. His radio didn't work. His GPS was useless. His lights were dying. He was alone in the dark with something that shouldn't exist, holding a woman who was already more dead than alive. Then he remembered the arrow in the clearing's center. The protective arrow, the one the Ho elder had said shouldn't be disturbed. "You're bound here," Fitzgerald said, the realization arriving with sudden clarity. The arrow, the marked trees, they're not just markers. They're a prison. You can't leave this area. The baycock's wings flared wider, and for the first time Fitzgerald saw something like anger in those burning eye sockets. "The violation called me. The Fisher cabin broke the binding. I hunt what enters my domain. Then I'll make sure no one ever enters again," Fitzgerald said. "I'll get the area restricted, protected, marked as sacred ground like it should have been 60 years ago. No more victims. The pattern ends." "Promises from the living mean nothing," the baycock hissed. "The living forget. The living violate. Only death remembers." "Then kill me instead of her," Fitzgerald said. The words came out steady, surprising him with their calmness. She's innocent. She didn't know about this place's history. But I came here deliberately, knowing the danger. That's worth more than an accidental trespass. Nguyen's hand tightened on his jacket. No, she whispered. The Baycock tilted its massive skull, considering. The smaller skeletons held their drawn bows, waiting. You offer trade, the Baycock said finally. Life for life. Spirit for spirit. Yes, Fitzgerald said. He thought about Elena, about the 3 hours in the cave, about the fact that he should have been the one to die in that collapse, about the survivor's guilt that had poisoned every day since. Maybe this was how it balanced. Maybe this was the trade he'd been trying to make all along. Accepted. The Baycock moved forward with terrible speed, its wings folding, its massive skeletal hands reaching for Fitzgerald. He had one moment to feel Nguyen being pulled from his arms, one moment to see the smaller skeletons lowering their bows, one moment to think this is it. Then the Baycock's hand closed around his chest, and cold beyond imagining drove into his body like a physical thing. He felt his ribs contract, felt something inside him being grasped, pulled, extracted. The pain was transcendent, existing in a space beyond normal sensation. And he screamed without sound, his voice stolen by the emptiness spreading through his torso. The world fragmented into pieces. Forest, sky, bone, darkness, all spinning in patterns that had no logic, no order. He was dying and already dead, present and absent, his identity dissolving like sugar in water. In the distance, he heard Nguyen screaming his name. Heard the sound of running footsteps, multiple people, voices calling. The search team, finally arriving, finally finding the clearing. Too late for him. But Nguyen would live. The pattern would break. 7 before, but not 7 after. The trade accepted and honored. The Baycock leaned close, its skull filling Fitzgerald's fragmenting vision. When it spoke, the voice was Elena's one final time. Now you know what I felt in the darkness. Now we're together again. Everything went black. Fitzgerald woke to pain. Not the transcendent pain of the Baycock's touch, but normal pain. Aching muscles, bruised ribs, a pounding headache. Sunlight filtered through his closed eyelids, warm and real. He opened his eyes and saw a hospital ceiling. Easy, a voice said. Chen's voice, familiar and grounding. You've been out for 16 hours. Fitzgerald turned his head carefully. He was in the medical center at Forks, the small hospital that served the Olympic Peninsula. Chen sat in a chair beside his bed, looking exhausted. Nguyen? He managed. Alive, Chen said. Hypothermic, dehydrated, some kind of internal injuries we're still trying to understand. But alive. She said you saved her. Memory flooded back. The clearing, the skeletons, the Baycock's hand in his chest. Fitzgerald's hand moved to his torso, pressing against the hospital gown. Everything felt normal. No empty spaces, no missing organs. What happened? He asked. Chen exhaled slowly. We found you both in the clearing around 2 a.m. You were unconscious, vitals so low the EMTs thought you might not make it. Nguyen was conscious but incoherent, kept saying something had you, something was taking you away. And by the time we got you both stabilized and extracted, it was dawn. The clearing looked normal, just old foundations and trees. The arrow you photographed was gone. The tree markings were still there, but they looked weathered. Old, like they'd been there for decades. Fitzgerald closed his eyes. You think I hallucinated it? The trauma, the stress, the darkness. I saw what I expected to see. I think, Chen said carefully, that something happened in that clearing. Something we don't have good explanations for. Nguyen's injuries are consistent with massive trauma, but there are no external wounds. You had hypothermia in 40-degree weather, and symptoms of severe cardiac stress despite being in excellent physical condition. And both of you keep talking about things that shouldn't exist. The trade, Fitzgerald whispered. I offered to trade my life for hers. And you're both alive, Chen said. So maybe whatever you bargained with decided differently. Fitzgerald thought about the Baycock's final words in Elena's voice, about the promise he'd made to get the area protected. The clearing needs to be closed, permanently. Sacred ground designation, full restriction. Already in process, Chen said. I pulled the historical documentation, contacted the Ho Tribal Council, submitted the paperwork this morning. It'll take time to make it official, but I'm implementing an interim closure effective immediately. No one goes near that area. Good, Fitzgerald said. He felt exhausted, hollowed out, but also lighter somehow, as if something that had been pressing on him for 2 years had finally lifted. Chen stood. Get some rest. We'll talk more when you're stronger. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, whatever happened out there, you brought her back. That matters. After Chen left, Fitzgerald lay in the sunlit hospital room, listening to the normal sounds of the living world. Footsteps in hallways, distant conversations, the beep of monitoring equipment. Through the window he could see blue sky, mountains, the Olympic Peninsula in daylight. But when he closed his eyes, he saw the clearing at night, the circle of marked trees, the Baycock's burning eye sockets. And he felt the cold spot in his chest where the arrow had struck, where the spirit's hand had reached inside him. He was alive, but he wasn't unchanged. The Baycock had taken something, not his liver, not his life, but something else, some barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He could feel it now, a sensitivity he hadn't had before, an awareness of spaces between spaces. His phone buzzed on the bedside table, a text from an unknown number. He picked it up and read, "Thank you. I'm alive because of you, but I can still feel it sometimes, the empty space where it reached. Do you feel it too? A.N." Fitzgerald typed back, "Yes." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, what did we actually see out there? Fitzgerald thought about his answer for a long time. Finally, he typed, "Something that remembers, something that was here before us, and will be here after. Something we were never meant to disturb." The dots appeared and vanished several times before the final message came. "I keep having dreams about the forest, about the rattling sound, about the cold. Does it ever stop?" Fitzgerald looked at the hospital ceiling, feeling the phantom cold in his chest, hearing the echo of rattling bones in his memory. He thought about Elena, about trauma, about the ways the past never fully releases its grip. He typed, "I don't know, but we survived. That has to count for something." Outside his window, the afternoon sun illuminated the Olympic Mountains, their peaks still snow-covered even in October. The forest stretched away toward horizons, ancient and vast, holding its secrets in the spaces between trees. And somewhere in that forest, in a clearing that was now permanently closed, an ancient hunger waited for the pattern to shift again, for the protections to weaken, for the next cycle to begin. 7 before, 7 after. The pattern incomplete. The Baycock patient. 3 weeks later, Fitzgerald sat in his apartment in Port Angeles going through the reports and documentation from the Nguyen case. The official conclusion was environmental exposure complicated by unknown medical factors, a bureaucratic way of saying they had no good explanation. Nguyen had been released from the hospital after a week, returning to Portland with instructions for follow-up care that the doctors admitted wouldn't address the core problem because they didn't understand the core problem. She'd called him twice since then, late at night, both times to ask if he was experiencing the same symptoms. The cold spots that appeared randomly on his body, the sense of being watched in darkness, the dreams of the clearing. Both times he'd said yes. The area around Fisher's clearing was officially closed now, marked with signs warning of dangerous conditions and protected as indigenous sacred ground. Chen had pushed the paperwork through with unusual speed, citing safety concerns and cultural sensitivity. No one would be legally allowed in that section of the Ho rainforest for the foreseeable future. But Fitzgerald knew it wouldn't last forever. Budgets would change, administrations would shift, Memories would fade. Eventually, someone would question why a section of forest remained closed with no clear ongoing threat. Eventually, the protections would weaken, and the Baycock would be waiting. His laptop showed the academic paper he'd been reading, the one from 1973 about coastal Salish mortuary practices. He'd contacted the author, now in her 80s, retired from the University of Washington, and driven to Seattle to meet her. Dr. Patricia Keene had listened to his carefully sanitized version of events, then said, "You saw it, didn't you? The Baycock." He'd nodded. She'd shown him more of her research, unpublished field notes from the 1960s and 70s, interviews with elders who'd spoken about the entity, about the clearing, about the fisher cabin that had violated sacred ground, about protective rituals that required constant maintenance, annual ceremonies that kept the boundary strong. The tribes knew, she'd said. They maintained the balance for generations. Then we came with our parks and our cabins and our certainty that we knew better. We dismissed their knowledge as superstition, and people died for our arrogance. "How do we fix it?" Fitzgerald had asked. She'd looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "You can't. Not completely. The old knowledge is mostly lost. The ceremonies aren't performed anymore. The best you can do is keep people away and hope the entity stays contained." Now sitting in his apartment, Fitzgerald pulled up his email and started typing a message to Chen. He'd been thinking about this for 3 weeks, letting the idea form slowly, making sure it wasn't just trauma or guilt or survivor's obligation. "I want to transfer to permanent assignment at Olympic," he wrote. "Specifically, I want to be the ranger responsible for monitoring the Fisher's clearing closure. I know it's unusual to have a dedicated position for a closed area, but given the historical significance and ongoing safety concerns, I think it's justified." He explained his reasoning, his qualifications, his willingness to take on the responsibility. He didn't mention the cold spots or the dreams or the way he could now sense wrongness in certain spaces. He didn't mention that he felt obligated to the Baycock, to the trade he'd made, to the living woman who'd walked out of the forest because of his choice. He sent the email and sat back, listening to the rain against his window. Port Angeles was 20 miles from the Hoh rainforest, but he could still feel the forest's presence, could still sense the entity waiting in the darkness between trees. His phone buzzed. A text from Nguyen. "Bad night. The dreams are getting worse. I keep seeing the clearing. Keep seeing you offering to trade yourself. Keep seeing that thing reaching into your chest. Tell me again that we survived." Fitzgerald typed back, "We survived. We're alive. The clearing is closed. No one else will disappear." But as he sent the message, he felt the cold spot pulse in his chest, felt the phantom touch of skeletal fingers around his heart. And he knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, beyond proof, that the Baycock hadn't released them completely. They'd been marked, changed, made aware of things that existed in the spaces normal people couldn't see. 7 before, the pattern incomplete, the trade accepted but not finished. And somewhere in the Olympic rainforest, in a clearing surrounded by marked trees, an ancient hunger waited for the cycle to continue. The new moon would come again in 28 days. Fitzgerald opened his laptop and started making plans for monthly patrols, for monitoring systems, for ways to ensure the closure remained enforced. He would be the guardian now, the watcher, the one who remembered what others would forget. It wasn't redemption. Elena was still dead, the cave collapse still his failure to prevent. But it was purpose. And for someone who'd spent 2 years drowning in survivor's guilt, purpose was enough. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Port Angeles, on the Olympic Mountains, on the vast rainforest that held its secrets in the darkness between ancient trees. And in that darkness, something rattled and waited and remembered. The pattern incomplete, the trade ongoing, the forest patient. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.